Today, we're getting into a case that absolutely rocked the American legal system. It's a story about revenge, so cold and so calculated, it turned a man of the law into a terrifying killer who went after the very system he once swore to protect. It's a really chilling question, right? But for the people of a small Texas county back in 2013, it became a terrifying reality. See, this isn't just a murder story. This is about that ultimate breach of trust, when the killer is coming from inside the halls of justice. So let's break down how this absolute nightmare unfolded. Okay, so our story takes us to Kaufman County, Texas. This is a place where the rule of law was, suddenly and violently just flipped on its head. In just 2 months, the community's top lawyers went from putting criminals away to being hunted down by one. What's just staggering here is how fast everything went down. First, on January 31st, Assistant DA Mark Hasse is shot and killed. In broad daylight, right outside the courthouse. Witnesses just saw a shooter dressed in all black jump into a getaway car and speed off. Then, only 2 months later, the horror gets so much worse. The district attorney himself, Mike McClelland, and his wife, Cynthia, are executed inside their own home. I mean, 2 top prosecutors assassinated. The entire county was gripped with fear. And this is where the story just gets haunting. After his friend and colleague Mark Hasse was murdered, a really defiant DA, Mike McClelland, went on TV and spoke directly to the killer. He had absolutely no idea he was looking into a camera and talking to the very same person who would murder him and his wife just a few weeks later. And you better believe the killer was watching. So, with the county's top lawmen being taken out one by one, investigators immediately thought this had to be something big, like a massive, organized hit. Their first and biggest theory? They were in the middle of an all-out war with a violent prison gang. And the focus landed squarely on a group called the 211 Crew. Now, this theory really picked up steam because of this one guy, Evan Ebel. He was a member who'd just gotten out of prison and immediately went on this insane, violent rampage. He killed a pizza delivery guy and the head of Colorado's entire prison system before he was killed in a shootout. So investigators had to ask, was this Kaufman County hit part of that same bloody campaign? And then this message comes in. An anonymous, taunting email sent to Crime Stoppers on Easter Sunday. It basically seemed to confirm everyone's worst fears. It was arrogant, it was demanding, and it really made it sound like a whole group was behind these murders. Law enforcement had no choice but to take it seriously. They even wrote back, asking how they could make contact. So, what made this email so believable was how specific and, sophisticated it was. The person who sent it proved they were the real deal by naming the exact type of ammo used in one of the murders, a detail the public did not know. Then they made a really clear demand for a judge to resign and even set a hard deadline. It all pointed to some powerful, organized enemy which just reinforced that prison gang theory. But here's the twist. While the FBI and the Texas Rangers were chasing this idea of a powerful prison gang, a couple of local investigators started digging through the old case files of the prosecutors who were killed. They weren't looking for a gang leader. They were looking for a motive. And they found one in a very, very unlikely place. And this brings us to Eric Williams. Now, on paper, this guy was brilliant, a member of the High IQ Society Mensa and a former justice of the peace. But his entire career just blew up in 2011 when he was caught red-handed, on camera, stealing 3 computer monitors from the courthouse. And guess who prosecuted him for that theft? The very 2 men who ended up dead, Mark Hasse and Mike McClelland. All of a sudden, investigators had a suspect with a very powerful, very personal reason for revenge. You want to talk about chilling? While investigators were quietly starting to build a case against him, Eric Williams was giving interviews to the news. He played the part perfectly, acting like a concerned former colleague, offering condolences, and praising the very men he had hunted down and murdered. He was hiding in plain sight. But an act like that can't last forever. As the suspicions started to build, investigators began to close in. And that carefully built facade of the grieving colleague, it started to crack, revealing the cold, meticulous monster underneath. So how did they finally nail him? It all came down to a few critical steps. Williams eventually agrees to an interview, but his answers just raised more red flags. Then he made a huge mistake. He let detectives do a preliminary search of his house, and what they found there was enough to get a full warrant.
And that warrant led to a tip about a secret storage unit, a tip that would blow this case wide open. So in that first interview, Williams claimed that because he was now a convicted felon, he had to get rid of his firearms. He said he sold all but one of his 16 guns. I mean, it sounded plausible, but something felt off to the detectives. And at his house, they found a taser, all sorts of weapon attachments, even a thermal sensor. Pretty strange stuff for a guy who supposedly didn't have any guns. And what they found in that storage unit was just unbelievable. It wasn't a smoking gun, it was an entire arsenal. They found the white Crown Vics spotted near the McClellan house. They found police gear, a crossbow, a massive stockpile of guns and ammo. And, as if that wasn't enough, they found jars of homemade napalm. It was literally a killer's treasure trove. So, with all that evidence from the storage unit, the case was pretty much sealed. On April 18th, just 19 days after the McClellan murders, the former Justice of the Peace, Eric Williams, was officially charged with capital murder. The man of the law was now facing the ultimate penalty of the law. The trial would bring out the last, most horrifying details of this whole plot. But the most damning testimony, it didn't come from cops or DNA experts. It came from the one person who knew all of Eric Williams' secrets, his own wife. This is Kim Williams. She was arrested right alongside her husband, but she eventually cut a plea deal. In exchange for a 40-year sentence, she agreed to testify against Eric during the penalty phase. That's the part where the jury decides between life in prison and the death penalty. And her testimony would paint a picture of just pure, remorseless evil. The prosecutor asked her a simple question. Why did Cynthia McClellan have to die? She was an innocent woman. And Kim's answer was just devastating. Eric Williams called her collateral damage. He knew she might be a witness, so he planned from the very beginning to eliminate her with just this chilling, tactical coldness. And think about this contrast for a second. It just shows a complete and total lack of humanity. Kim testified that Eric told her he shot Cynthia an extra time because, in his words, she was still moaning. And how did they mark this night of brutal murder? They went over to her parents' house, grilled steaks, and they celebrated. The coldness is just staggering. The prosecution also asked Kim about that first murder, the assassination of Mark Hasse, where she was the getaway driver. When they asked her to describe her husband's mood as they were fleeing the scene, her answer was just one single, terrifying word: happy. After hearing all the physical evidence and then the absolutely chilling testimony from his own wife, the jury's decision came back fast. Eric Williams was found guilty of capital murder, and in the penalty phase, they sentenced him to death by lethal injection.
And that brings us to the final question here. I mean, Eric Williams was without a doubt a genius. He planned every single detail, from the disguises to those taunting emails, but in the end, his own arrogance completely overshadowed his intelligence. Maybe his fatal mistake was believing he was smart enough to commit the perfect crime, and underestimating the very system he was once a part of, and forgetting that a secret is only a secret until one person decides to tell it.